Hello to those of you who've joined us already. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to let some other folks join, and then we shall dive in. For those of you joining us now, we're just comparing backgrounds. Whilst Jenny's gone for a very classic background, Richard come for a very on-brand background. I like it. Right, give it 30 seconds more, and then anybody who joins after that's late, so they'll have to catch up on the recording. Cool. Right, we shall get cracking. So, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those of you joining us from across the pond, like Jenny. Thank you for coming to today's webinar, our March webinar, talking on the incredibly important topic of sustainability within marketing. We're really pleased that this topic, unsurprisingly, has drawn the biggest audience we've had so far for our webinars in the short time we've been doing them, no doubt because it's not only an important topic, but we have a really knowledgeable panel with us today. So thank you today for joining us, Richard and Jenny. What we would like to get through today is discussing the definition of sustainability, so how we define it, the kind of common misconceptions that marketers fall into, and a few tips on how to avoid accidental greenwashing, before we move on to the influence that we can have as marketers on sustainability and how we can be more sustainable ourselves as marketing departments. But if we can kick off with a quick introduction for you both. So Jenny from fellow B Corp Tradewater from across the pond, thank you for joining us today's webinar. You want to give us a quick overview about who you are and Tradewater?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jenny Morgan. I am the Market Development Manager at Tradewater. Tradewater is a B Corp, as Tom mentioned, and we are a project developer. We destroy non-CO2 greenhouse gases. So we're focusing on typically man-made gases that are banned from production but still exist out in the world. And so by destroying them or preventing them from leaking into the atmosphere, we're helping prevent catastrophic climate change. So the gases we target have a very high global warming potential, and by destroying them, we can have a fighting chance of getting back to how we should be.
Fantastic. And yeah, your kind of insight and knowledge that you have from working in that field is going to be invaluable today, I'm sure. And Richard, thanks also for joining us from Play It Green. Obviously, we've been knowing each other for quite a while, but if you can give the audience an overview of who you are and what Play It Green aim to do.
Sure. So I'm Richard, one of the two co-founders of Play It Green. Play It Green is a business that has a subscription service to help people and businesses lower their footprint and have a more immediate environmental and social impact through reforestation and re-giving 10% of our turnover to good causes.
Fantastic. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Tom. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director here at Webmart, sustainable marketing agency based here in the UK. So Richard, Jenny, if we can start off with, let's talk around what we mean when we say sustainability. I don't know about you, but often when I'm speaking to customers and brands, I get very different definitions of different terms, very different meanings when people say carbon neutral, net zero. What does sustainability mean to you, Richard? And what kind of common misconceptions do you maybe see when speaking to people?
So it's funny this. I asked ChatGPT what sustainability meant, and it's quite interesting. It was fairly relevant. It said sustainability refers to a system, whether it's an ecosystem, a business, or a society, and to continue functioning over the long term without depleting resources it depends on or causing long-term harms to the environment or society, which I thought was quite a good definition. I always go from a more emotional viewpoint, and there's an old saying that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And for me, sustainability is about a way of thinking. It's a shift in consciousness to always thinking about the impact of everything we do. As a person, it's, do we need it? If we need it, can we buy in a sustainable manner? Can it be? And then looking at how things are disposed of and end of life. As a business, it's making sure it's not just about planet as well. It's about well-being. It's about good business practice. It's doing things the right way. Again, going back to the changing consciousness, it's having the thought with everything we do, what is the impact? Because that's been forgotten in the quest for profit, unfortunately, over the last 100 years. And then going back to the problems, yes, there's lots of lack of education into the terms, the meanings of things, how it all works. And really, sustainability starts with education, I would say.
Good. Okay, thank you. And Jenny, I guess same question. Do you agree with Richard's definition of sustainability? Is it something similar to what you work to?
I agree with the bot and Richard. So both of you had a great response. I would also say it's just leaving things better as you found it, and it's a way of maintenance. So as Richard mentioned, it's not only about the planet, it's also something that, you know, what can you sustain over time? So if you wanted to eat better or have a healthier diet, you would need to put together something that you could do long term. And so similarly with how you're using your resources, how you are using your internal resources in your business, how you're working together, all of those things are things that need to be sustainable so that you can keep it going and not burn out in a week or run out of resources or anything like that. So yeah, definitely it needs to be something that's applied to all things. And I love the take pause and think about your actions. I think a lot of time we're on autopilot and we're just kind of being directed by something, but we don't really even know what it is. And so if we take a moment to think, why do I do this? Is this the best way? It can often lead to a lot of eureka moments and insights that can improve not only your business, but also the way that you're utilizing the planet.
That makes total sense. And I think, I guess my follow-up question to that would be, do you think, given the damage already done to the environment, that sustainability is enough? And I ask that from if we start today in being sustainable moving forward, is that enough? Or should we as leaders now be looking at not just having sustainable business practices across marketing and other areas, but also what we can do kind of from a regeneration perspective to unpick some of the damage already done? Richard, if I come to you first on that one.
It's both. We have to start. It's the old saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. We can't look at things and say, well, it's too late, because if it is, there's no point doing anything. But we also can't procrastinate and say the time's not right to start. And I do hear that a lot from businesses. The time's not right. Well, when is the time right? You've got to start. And I'm sure we'll come on to the changes in attitudes towards sustainability and reasons to start. But on the other hand, it's a long term. Sustainability is long term. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a journey. And we've just all got to get on that journey now, really. Yeah,
I guess the key message there being, if you haven't already started, start.
Completely.
I guess the follow-up question from that, and that I hear from not necessarily the businesses I work with, but from individuals that I kind of speak to about sustainability, is there quite a common perception is what impact can I really have? Like this is a global issue. I'm an individual. I'm a small business. I'm part of a small department in a company. What's the point when the UK government can turn around and say, "Oh, we're going to open a new coal mine," or China and India can refuse to kind of phase out coal use and all that kind of thing? What's the point, Jenny? What's the point in me as an individual trying, because the impact I can have is so small compared with them?
I think everyone's life has meaning and we all have purpose. I don't think that we're just all populating and getting larger for no reason. I think that all of us have something to give to others in our community and to our families, our friends, our business partners. So I think we all have a purpose and can bring something positive to the world and our own experience. And I've struggled with, I've teamed it or titled it climate anxiety. There's been times where I've felt as if I just get in the corner of my house and hold my breath, maybe I won't have a negative footprint or cause the problem to grow. But after going through that, I can now see that I can make an effort, and also my individual actions can create change. It spreads. It's just like that pay it forward movement where kindness, people were doing acts of kindness and they could see that it was spreading. It's very similar that you can do small changes within your own personal life, within your business. It will also spread within yourself. So making amends for our actions in the past is definitely something that we need to do. But going with that analogy of eating healthier, you start to eat healthier, maybe you start to go on walks, and then you start to change some of the behavior. Your family starts to notice. It does spread. And so we have a lot more power than we give ourselves. And you need to remind yourself of that. You have a purpose. You woke up this morning, so you should make it a day that's one to remember.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I guess with Richard, with you work with lots of kind of small businesses and individuals as well. And I guess that kind of objection must be something that you face quite regularly.
Do you know, in part, yes, but part of our narrative as a business is we're creating a community, and every individual is part of a community. And when one individual does something in a community, it sends ripples of change throughout that community. That community then interacts with other communities, and the ripples of change get bigger. And then the other thing about being sustainable and living a sustainable life as an individual, it makes you feel better. You wake up in the morning feeling that you're having a positive impact, and that rubs off on other people as well, and they see that, and it just becomes a way of life, but a positive way. I think part of the problem with the negativity around it is down to press and saying constantly the news is negative. We've just been doing some research into it, and the press and media produce negative news because that's what people click on, because we're programmed as a species to find out about what could be bad for us and then try and avoid it. But what that does is it makes everyone think all there is out there is bad things happening, and it's not true. There's loads of good happening as well. We need to remember we're to be empowered, because we've become disempowered over the last 100 years, and we do have the power to create change.
Yeah, and I know your organisation does a lot with around reframing the problem from being a huge catastrophe where you can't have an impact to being one of opportunity and positivity. Because like you said there, it's not necessarily just about what impact you as an individual have. If you can make little changes and save, a ton or 100 tons or 1,000 tons within your organisation, as you both kind of alluded to there, it's not just about your individual impact and individual change you make. It's what that then shows to your network, to your community, to be able to expand that change exponentially.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we've kind of touched on the definitions of sustainability, kind of what it means to us, and why I guess it's important that we don't think the problem is too big to bother tackling on a small level. So let's, if we can now look at specifically what marketing as a department can do, both in terms of marketing's influence on communications and influence on persuading people, and within marketing as its own department, its own communications, how marketing can impact the environment. And I guess we've sort of touched on it there when you were talking about language use, Richard. I wonder if you go into a little bit more detail about how you think the way we frame things can have a big impact on the planet.
So for me, if you go back to the 1920s, when marketing became a thing and advertising became a thing after Freud's psychological research and the understanding of how the brain worked, that marketing created huge amounts of negative behavior through advertising smoking as being good for you, and that all of those different things. And then in the 70s being used to, or the 80s, to deny climate change. It was marketing and it was language that was used. With the brain, when you market negatively, it creates negative action because that's how it works. But when you market positively, it creates positive action. And I go back to the way they recruited during the war. Your country needs you. You can be part of it, and it created this spirit. Whereas if you told everyone we're at war with Germany, if you don't sign up, we'll probably lose. People are going to go, oh God, I'm not being part of that. And that's just one example. But the way you frame your language is it creates feelings in people. We're programmed to respond to stories and to language. And so if you can create can-do language, if you can create positive language in your campaigns, make people feel good about doing good, then you create change, you create positive change.
So, and that use of language, I'm interested how that translates with you, Jenny, particularly within your organization, because of what you're doing is so directly linked to the planet and having a positive impact. Do you find that maybe within your organization, the purpose behind what you do is driven through the opportunity to be part of something positive and good, or the fear of, if we don't do this, something bad will happen?
I mean, I think that the gravity of the situation can be impactful, but it doesn't have to be communicated through fear. It can be communicated with a sense of urgency, and an explanation of the problem in a way that we can all feel empowered to tackle it. I personally gravitated I actually have a long background in the event industry. And so I know a lot about, how it takes intentional actions to change your behavior when it comes to industries that have operated a similar way for a very long time. And so I gravitated towards Tradewater's climate solutions because I felt very excited about a solution that had a very immediate result. The gas that is leaking is destroyed, and that's the end of the story. There's not a chance that a wildfire could destroy it or that it could come back. And so even though all climate solutions are very impactful, I really liked what Tradewater had to say and was leading. I personally, as a consumer, when I receive an email from a brand that I support that says, by you being part of this community of customers, you have helped create XYZ change. You saved 200 million gallons of water, or you redirected X amount of pounds from the landfill. And that makes me feel as if my small action of clicking and buying something online that I deemed that I needed, I am now part of something. And that messaging is really strong. When Tradewater sends out updates in our newsletters and some of our campaigns, we talk about how individuals that have spent $15 that year, all of that collectively, we've destroyed 6 million tons of greenhouse gases. And that's all been made possible with small and large contributions to what we're doing. And I think that messaging really resonates with the individual and with the organization. They might have just clicked and that was it. But then when they find out, oh, wow, I'm really part of a system of people that are really driving change, I think that we all want to hear that. We all want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a couple of really good, interesting points there about, it kind of almost goes back to the why should we care? Why should we do something? Not necessarily just for the environmental impact, but potentially there you've mentioned the fact that because of their purpose and their mission in the environment, they've attracted you to work for Tradewater. and they've managed to massively add value to the customers because they're part of a wider community. And there's lots of studies out there to show that customer demand is now demanding more purpose-driven, ethical, sustainable brands to work with. And what it sounds like they've done really nicely there is make it very easy for the customers to be part of something very big and impactful. And I know that's a key thing for marketers, I think, is leveraging that, because you as a business and a collective, as we've touched on before, can have a much bigger impact than one person doing one thing. So understanding your impact that you can have and communicating that in a way with your audience that I feel that they're part of it, they're part of a community, they're part of making a difference without necessarily having to do anything too grand. I mean, the example you gave, there was a $15 contribution, it was clicking a button, and they can be part of that and feel part of it. And I guess, Richard, at Play It Green, that's the kind of thing that you're working with smaller businesses on, is what can we do simply to have a wider impact?
Yeah, agreed. We, as well as our subscription service for the workforce, we help businesses with their net zero framework and mapping things out and keeping it simple, because when it becomes complicated, it doesn't stick. It's like fad diets. You lose a bit of weight and then you put it back on and you forget about it. Whereas I say sustainability becomes embedded in your business, and the only way you do that is by micro adjustments. It's like learning anything or becoming good and skillful at anything, whether it's a sport or playing a musical instrument. You learn by micro adjustments, and that becomes what you do and who you are. And it's the same for business. And just going back to the statistics, we just did some reports on the latest research, and I wrote some down because I thought it might be interesting. 69%, this is from this year, this is from Nielsen's recent research, 69% of consumers believe sustainability is more important to them now than it was 2 years ago. 68% are more likely to consider sustainable brands. And one really interesting one, and one of our customers, we have an accountancy firm called Danes who have 900 employees, and they now on their recruitment page have our commitment to the planet, their climate positive journey, and how they're working with us and what they're doing as a business over and above the workforce initiative to reduce their footprint. 70% of job applicants are looking at a business's impact, whether it's environmental or social now. So if you want to enhance your brand, if you want to increase your consumer engagement and attract and retain better employees, sustainability is the way to go for business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was at a roundtable yesterday, and we were talking about kind of retention of talent and acquisition of new young talent. And one of the things that came up, which I found really interesting, was that some of the employers were used to getting questions at interviews like, "What's your pension scheme like? How much am I likely to get out of that? What hours do I work? Blah blah blah." And the questions today are, "What's your ESG policy? What impact are you having?" It's totally flipped, which I found really interesting, because I think you're right. I think it's valued by consumers and employees. Yeah. So I guess my question then is, as a business who perhaps, let's say we're a business, we're an e-commerce business or a retail business or something like that, we haven't necessarily had sustainability at the forefront. We want to do some good things. I mean, where do you start? Because sustainability is a bit of a minefield. I've spoken to people before who are slightly reluctant to say too much about it because they're worried they don't know enough, and they're worried about saying the wrong thing and then being outed for greenwashing or purpose washing or something else. So where would you recommend somebody start? If we start with Jenny, and then we'll come to you, Richard.
Tradewater has, and many other companies offer, free carbon calculators. You can go through a 15-minute assessment of your business to see where some of your gaps are. See where you're emitting the highest amount of greenhouse gases, and most likely that's associated with high costs as well. So Richard mentioned a lot of co-benefits. Sustainability also helps not only brand engagement and loyalty, but then it also helps that retention as well as cost saving initiatives over time. efficiency improves, productivity. So there's so many co-benefits that go along with this type of procedural review and assessment and change. So if you go through a carbon calculator, and we have one at Tradewater that you can use just to see where your gaps are, you can then say, well, it seems as if a large amount of our emissions are coming from employee travel. Maybe there's some policies we can put in place that can help lower that and be a bit more efficient in the way that we distribute our presence around the globe when we need to attend a conference or we need to visit a customer or whatever else is driving you to travel. So I would say knowledge would be the first step. Find out what that is and then go from there. And right now the B Corp community is working on reduction resources. It's B Corp Movement Month, and so we'll be sharing some of those, but a lot of the resources that are being shared are really 6 simple steps of reviewing how you have your branded merch, or how you design your website. All of these things have really easy, quick steps that you can implement that are not challenging and will not take too much time. And then you kind of start building that muscle. You start to become more confident in that.
Yeah, I agree. I think with any kind of change or improvement program, if you don't have a baseline, it's very difficult. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. It goes back to that. If you understand your impact in a granular fashion, as you say, you're then in a position to see where you do that gap analysis piece and see where to make change. And I think that probably applies at a business level, at a marketing department level, and probably at an individual level as well. It's that process that you have to go through first. Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, 100%. Education is the critical thing for sustainable change. We're both talking about our businesses, but that was why we set up our 3-step solution. And step 1 is reducing footprints through tips and education. Because whether you're an individual or a business, you need to learn how to do it. Then the next thing is measuring it and being transparent, open, and honest about it. Having a plan. And not being scared to make mistakes, because if you are genuine, open and honest about making mistakes and showing how you resolve them, it's actually benefit to the other people watching what you're doing, your competitors and your partners. It's about being authentic, and as long as you are authentic, open, honest and transparent, and educate yourself on what's the right thing to do, it works. And we say there's so many benefits. We get reports from loads of our members that they've got better staff or they've closed a deal. We started a good example. We have a partner who's a media company that was pitching for business at Manchester Central, who are one of our new partners, and they had our branding, the badge, about working with us in their email signature. They were asked about it, explained that they were educating their staff and they were working on a net zero frame policy for moving forward, and they got the deal. And then we got put in touch with Manchester Central as well. But that's how it works, and it's being driven by Gen Zs and millennials, the first 2 generations to be digital for their whole lives, who have access to any information they want. And believe it or not, these generations that have grown up with access to all the information, what do they want? They want impact. They want social impact, environmental impact. They want brands to do good. So
yeah, I think a point there that you made about honesty, openness, and transparency is really important for the people who are concerned about saying the wrong thing. Correct. Education is really important, but also just being honest. Don't try and overclaim. We've got the new lovely ASA guidance out now about how and what you can and can't say, and what kind of things you need to back up a claim with, to give kind of some form of guidance to marketers, which is helpful and probably not something that's been a lot more ambiguous and in a bit of a grey area in the past. So it's nice to have some guidance there. But yeah, generally speaking, if you're honest and open, people empathize with that, and probably end up relating more to your brand as well. Specifically with marketing, then I think we agree that the kind of first 2 things to do is around calculating the impact and educating yourself on how to then mitigate it. When it comes to kind of strategies that we use with customers, we have a we call it calculate, mitigate, offset, communicate kind of process, which kind of aligns with what we were talking about there, is work out what the carbon footprint is. So if it's a print campaign or a digital campaign or a website, as you mentioned earlier, Jenny, calculating the carbon footprint of that in a granular fashion to then give you the data that you need to be able to make the right decisions on how to have the biggest impact on your carbon footprint as a business. So when it comes to that mitigation point, because I think this is the biggest area that people should be focused on, is great to do calculations, great to do offsetting or sequestering or carbon capture and all that kind of things, but the reduce point is where we have the biggest impact. So what kind of strategies do you use and do you see for effectively mitigating a marketing department or a company's carbon footprint? Jenny, if we come to you first. Appreciate that's quite a big question. How do we do it? How do we reduce our carbon footprint? Where do you start?
Again, I would say it starts where you are producing the most and the biggest problem, and then going from there. So if there are ways that you can transition to digital, if you haven't yet, that's a good first step. Then you can then assess your digital footprint and put the pressure on your partners. Ask your cloud service provider or your web developer or whomever you're partnering with on their sustainability efforts. If you start to ask your internal business partners and external community on their commitments and what they are doing, then you can then find ways to not only help your own business, but then they can do better as well. I believe it's 80% of an organization's emissions come from their supply chain, especially those that are large. And so by addressing your supply chain, or if you're a small business, becoming more green, that's then adding this value proposition for everyone. And so I would definitely start where you're producing the most and go from there. And just leaning on those experts that you're partnering with to assist you with that. You're not alone in that. A few mentions, you can go to the Green Software Foundation. There's a way that you can assess your software. If you have a piece of software product that you have that you want to see how green it is, it will give you a score, and then it'll provide tips. You can also go through an analysis to see the sustainability levels of your website and see what your digital footprint is. All of those resources are free, similar of how you would address accessibility. That's also important. And so that knowledge is definitely going to be the best step to move forward.
I think the point you make there around challenging your supply chain, because I know for us as a business, 95% of our emissions is scope 3 are from within our supply chain. But we're also seeing it, I don't know if it's similar in the US, but in the UK, for quite a while within public sector procurement, they've often been sustainability criteria that you've had to meet, but it's really starting to ramp up now in private sector procurement as well. We've had one come through the other day where, as part of our bid, our proposal to win the work, we had to include a full carbon calculation of what is our impact in delivering this contract and what are we going to do to reduce it. And when I saw that question, I was so happy. It was because it's finally starting to, I think, click with those organizations that for them, their supply chain, that's where the majority of their emissions are. And just by asking the question, even if some suppliers don't know the answer, but they start to see it from their customers, they start to think, oh, right, that's going to crop up more. That's something I need to look at. That's something I need to fix. And I guess this is for Richard, similar question in terms of where would you start when mitigating carbon footprint? So we've got the calculation done. How do we go about reducing it?
For me, there's you've got to do bottom up and top down approach. So bottom up is you'd mitigate the long term by educating your team and creating that culture shift within the business. Because what you will find is then your team starts to come up with the solutions for you, because it just becomes second nature. Yes, about looking at the biggest points of footprint, which usually is the supply chain. What is happening though is every business is going to be required to have a carbon reduction plan within the next 2 to 4 years as legislation from the government. It's already required if you want to get government business, and that requires you to have a footprint report and to have it's not a particularly detailed plan, but a plan of how to go forward, reducing your footprint. So if you start now, not only are you getting all the benefits of employees and consumers, but you're getting ahead of the game with legislation. So it's already part of your business and you're not going last minute, oh God, we've got to do this. So measure, plan, educate. Those are the 3 ways.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we all have very similar approaches to this by the sounds of it, which would be indicative that we're along the right lines at least. Yes. Now, let's say we've got a marketing campaign that's gone out. It's an email campaign, a direct mail campaign. We've calculated the carbon footprint of it. We've mitigated it as far as we can, but there's obviously going to be still some impact left. Now, offsetting often gets a bit of a bad rep, particularly following recent articles. I'd be interested to get your opinions on, first of all, is offsetting the best way? And if so, how can we ensure we're investing in schemes that are having the biggest possible impact, Richard?
So for me, some environmentalists will disagree with what I have to say, but for me, we won't work with businesses that aren't on a reduction journey. So if a business comes to us and says, we want to plant trees with you to offset our footprint, if they're not committed to the journey, we won't work with them. It's that simple. Because we're not going to be a company that just promotes offset, because that's why planting trees and repairing the planet is step 2 in our 3-step solution. Step 1 is reduction. However, I firmly believe that reforestation is so massively required across the globe. And I've visited planting sites and we work with Eden Reforestation, so it's an employee to plant, monitor, and protect. They are creating a social impact with the trees as well as an environmental impact. And having visited places, so the coastal regions of Madagascar where we replace the mangroves, the coastal communities relied on the fisheries. When the mangroves had gone, the sediment washes out to sea and the fish die and there's no fisheries. So by replacing those mangroves and paying the people to replace them, you're also replacing their economy. This is why we use nature-based solutions as offset if you're on the journey to reduction, because there's so much more impact than using a technology, paying for stoves in Africa or something like that that's reducing. For me, that doesn't work as well. It's like moving bath water from one part of the bath to the other with no purpose. Whereas planting trees and replacing lost habitats, it works and it's needed.
Would you agree, Jenny?
I think it's a combination of climate solutions. So I've said this before, and one day when I decide to be a cartoonist, I'm going to actually draw it. But imagine if we're on a canoe and it's sinking. The work that Tradewater does is plugging the hole that's causing the sinking, and Richard is scooping the water out of the boat. And so they're both very important. They both have to be done. Yeah. If one's done and not the other, you're still going to sink. And so it definitely is a combination of impact measures that have to be done, and we all have to work together. From the criticism of offsetting, I think that it's the reason why it's become somewhat of a taboo word. I believe in some areas it's not even allowed to be used anymore. You have to use a different term. I think as human beings, we like to get very hung up on the words. We like to point fingers at those that have done bad acts and get very obsessed with that piece of it. It's just like if you know someone that is not very kind, but they send you a holiday gift every year, that person is still not someone that you want to be around. That doesn't mean that holiday gifts are horrible and they represent something mean. They're apples and oranges. They're completely different topics. So an offset is a representation of a beneficial act that helps the planet and society. Definitely the climate solutions that have multiple impact levels, not only just climate action, but they also help lift up an economy, higher marginalized communities, anyone that might not, have access to jobs, or all of those types of impact actions are definitely the ones that you should prioritize. But it's simply just a representation of an act. So I think that offsets, once you are reducing your emissions, you do need to offset, because this webinar right now is producing emissions, but it's an important one. This is connection. This is providing information. We shouldn't hide in our house and hold our breath. We should be connecting. And so we'll reduce our footprint as much as possible, and then support the climate solutions that have the greatest impact.
Yeah, I love that analogy of, you can get a gift from somebody, but if they're horrible the whole time, and that kind of links in with Richard's point around you're not going to work with the nasty people who just want to buy a gift. You're going to work with the people who want to improve and want to develop and want to buy a gift. I quite like that way of putting it, and also, supporting offsetting schemes. And I'm sure that the audience will be familiar with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, and supporting schemes like the one you referenced there, was it Madagascar, where it's not just supporting the climate but also the local economy. It's if you selecting the right schemes, as long as they're accredited, particularly the ones that have the wider impact, I don't think is an issue. We kind of our approach to it is very, very similar. We definitely support offsetting schemes and accredited ones. Carbon capture technology is still kind of cost prohibitive for us as a way to invest, and hopefully that won't be the case forever. I think as a business, we look at carbon offsetting and we think kind of in the short term and probably the medium term, the cost of carbon offsetting is going to increase a lot. And so I think that the kind of the businesses who are looking for an easy way to say we're carbon neutral, or we're doing our bit for the environment just by not reducing and just carbon offsetting, I think quite quickly will become financially a poor decision for them, because it's going to become more expensive. Just before we move on to Q&A, just I'm conscious of time. So for those of you who are watching live, if you do have any questions, pop them in the Q&A section at the bottom, and we shall do our best to answer them. But I want to go around and ask you, first of all, is there anything you think we've not discussed so far? We've taken into account, we talked around defining sustainability, we talked about why we should care, the influence marketing can have in terms of its use of language, and how we can position things to have a wider impact, and the kind of process that we should go through around calculation, mitigation and reduction, and then offsetting for our carbon footprint. Is there anything pertinent that you think we've missed that we should definitely mention while we're here?
Yes.
Open to either of you.
I just want to state that climate risk is financial risk. So I know we had discussed this on a previous call, but it is, if you had a risk to your business being available and still around in 5 years, that would be something that you would want to address, and you would put resources towards addressing that risk. Climate is one of those risks, and I'm not using this as a fear tactic. It's a business discussion. Businesses will be at risk, that especially those that have a reliance on specific resources. There will be risk associated with the increase of this climate catastrophe that we're experiencing, and it will continue to be difficult to manage for some time. So we do need to address those risks now for your business. Your profits are not possible if the planet is not thriving and your consumer base is unable to engage with your brand. And so you may be a bit sticker shocked on some of the solutions or some of the actions that you need to take to reduce your emissions or support climate actions. but it's much cheaper than it would be to not address them. And then 5 years from now, you have a serious problem on your hands that is threatening the survival of your business. And so it's kind of if you do your dishes after we've used a lot of metaphors during this webinar, by the way, and I love it. If you do your dishes after you eat and you put each one in the dishwasher, it's a lot easier to maintain, even though it is still a task. But if you just pile them all in the sink, it's going to be a big task that you, or probably someone else in your house, because I'm not doing that, is going to have to address. And so it's the small increments that we need to start addressing today that's going to help us in the long term. So think about if it's a bit too much to think about it from a business perspective and something that you need to address for your business.
And that's quite a good way of selling it in at a senior level to get buy-in as well. This isn't just about the planet. This is about the survival of our business. Then you've got to pay attention now. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm not going to mention that analogy because otherwise I'm going to do the dishes tonight. So, Richard, anything to add?
A couple of things. Business has always been about pure profit. It's been about how do we increase the profits, and we've never looked at the impacts of that. And I think that there's going to be a change in the paradigm of how we think about what's important for our business to be sustainable. And I'm not just talking planet sustainability, financial sustainability. And the change is that if you look after people and planet, the profit will look after itself because that's the way the market's going. So there is a huge opportunity for businesses that see that and transition quickly. I think the other thing, we have to change the way we think about impact. It's not immediate impact anymore. We've got to look long term. I think one of the biggest problems is politicians, and this is why don't trust the governments to create the change, do it yourself, because governments are looking at 4-year cycles. They're not looking at what's the impact of the next generation. But actually, we're working with a company that's working on some space projects, and they're looking at, for the Mars project, they're looking at 10 generations of impact to see what will happen. We've never as a species done that before. But that's what's happening now. And as businesses, we have to be looking at that as well. What's the legacy we're going to leave?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. 10 generations. That's a lot of planning. But you're absolutely right. I think the business has always been a huge, had the potential to be a huge force for good, because we can act quickly and think long term.
Correct.
Which is not a privilege of necessarily a privilege of public institutions. So where we can see a problem that's going to impact us long term, we can absolutely be the facilitators of change. And the people in this virtual webinar watching afterwards can absolutely be the catalyst for change within your organizations, which then spreads beyond them. The final question I shall ask you both is for a 1 or 2 top tips for what people should do as soon as they've finished this webinar. What do they do? What's the first thing that you would recommend they do? I'm going to go first for the sole reason that I don't want either of you to have stolen my ones. And I have to quickly think of another one on the spot, so I'm going to leave it with you. The first one for me is to complete the B Corp impact assessment online. It's free to do. If you've got no interest in becoming a B Corp, that's fine. But it provides a really good gap analysis across not just environment, but workers and community and these kinds of things as well, as to where you could improve. It's free to do. It'll take a couple of hours to work through, and it will provide you a really valuable framework. And the second one was, we've talked around how we all have kind of similar frameworks for going about reducing our impact. It always starts off with calculations, understanding your impact in education, moves through to mitigation, reduction, and ends with kind of offsetting carbon capture. It would be to put in place a similar framework within your organization for your approach to carbon reduction, because sustainability as a topic can seem very ethereal, can seem very big, can seem very scary. But if you break it down into, right, this is the thing I need to do first, I need to work out what the impact is. Then once I have the information, it's much easier to work out how to reduce it. And then it's much easier to work out how to offset it. So they would be my 2 bits. Richard, what would your tips be?
So apart from joining Play It Green,
Of course.
the first thing I would do is appoint a sustainability champion within the business. Because if you've got a sustainability lead, things happen. If you don't, it doesn't. They can keep on top of it. It's their baby, and they run with it. And then the second thing, get on a carbon literacy course.
Mm-hmm.
Understand the terms, understand the basics, understand how the pieces fit together. I always go back to it. So I started mixed martial arts at a very late age, and it took me about 18 months before I would even do any sparring, because I wanted to learn every little bit by bit. And it's a journey, and it's sustainability is exactly the same. It does seem really big and scary, but no one in the right mind expects your business to become an expert in it overnight. But if we go back to, if you're authentic, you educate yourself, you have a plan, you look at it as a journey, as a culture shift, everyone wins.
Good suggestions. Jenny, I don't know if being last is a benefit because you've had more time to think, or a disbenefit because we might have already nicked yours.
You stole all of mine. I love all of those suggestions. I also, about the B Corp impact assessment, I think all 3 of us would be more than happy to answer any questions about that process. So please reach out to us if you do have any questions, or if you just want to have your hand held while you go through it. I think we'd all be willing to share our insights. And I would also say, calculate your carbon footprint. Go through one of the carbon calculators. We have one on Tradewater's site. If you go to tradewater.us, you can find it, or any of the others that are out there. There's many. They're all very similar, so you can't go wrong. Give yourself some knowledge there. And then once you've gone through Richard's advice of joining Play It Green and appointing someone internally within your team, find somebody outside of your company that you want to have as a mentor. What brand makes you feel good and you think is doing everything right, which they aren't. Everyone's progressing. Patagonia is the shining star of there's so many shining stars of the B Corp movement, but Patagonia is also always progressing in no one is deeming themselves as perfect. So find a company that you admire, reach out to someone within LinkedIn, say, hey, I really admire what you're doing as a brand, and I'd love to just ask you a few questions. Join a Slack group or something like that where you can get involved in that type of community. Maybe there's a meetup in your local area, and find somebody that you can learn from, and then do it for someone else when you are the most knowledgeable in the space, and pass it on. So that's what I would do if I were you.
Yeah, and that community aspect that you talked about is a really friendly and welcoming community within B Corp and sustainability more generally, because I don't think brands look to use sustainability as a USP, because the brands who do sustainability really well know it isn't a USP. It's working together to solve a problem, and so knowledge sharing. That's why the calculations are all free, all this kind of stuff, because it's about how can we have the biggest impact, not how can we use it to make the most money, which is really refreshing. I think to Richard's point earlier about realigning what matters as a business, if years ago, if I was writing a business plan, it would be, it's going to cost this and it's going to deliver that in profit. Today at Webmark, we're really looking, I could write a business plan or a business case for a project, and the result doesn't have to be profit. It could be reduction of emissions or this much of a positive impact, which is a great shift to see. Haven't had any questions through, presumably because we've answered any question that anybody could ask on this topic. But if you do have questions specific to your business, I'm sure Jenny and Richard and myself would be more than happy to answer any questions you do have. So either connect with us on LinkedIn and drop us a message if there's anything we can do to help. And I guess that just leaves me to say thank you to you both, Jenny and Richard, for joining. I think that's been a really valuable conversation. Particularly those tips at the end. I've noted them all down, and we'll be implementing some of those internally. So yeah,